Hey, hi friends. What's good? What's poppin'? Welcome back to another episode of the Howdy Podcast. My name is Jasper. You're joining us for another enthralling, life-changing episode. I was about to say empowering, but I don't know if I have empowered you very much, so I'm gonna call it what it is. So today I have not one, but two very special guests with me here on this podcast today. They're one of the two of the OG BL podcasters on YouTube. You might have probably heard of their podcast somewhere before. They do a lot of BL content like interviewing actors and screenwriters, talking about TV series, and spilling all the juices of the BL industry. So without further ado, let me welcome today's guests. They are the lovely hosts of Lovecast the Podcast. Welcome, guys. Hi,
Thank
guys.
you. Hello. Hello.
Hello. So
That
I
was such a
guess
nice introduction.
Love it.
so I guess how are you guys? Let's start right there. How are you guys?
That's always a question. Uh, it's overall pretty well. I just came back from a nice vacation, so I've been trying to get back into the swing of like adult life again, and it's been a long week, but I'm excited to. Saturday is always a good day because we do like the podcast stuff, and then we also obviously have like kin Porsche going on and stuff like that. So
Mm-hmm.
Saturdays are usually a good day.
Yeah, it's been a pretty mentally exhausting week. So I think that being able to record stuff today and just talk about things that we love is going to be a good distraction.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm feeling pretty good today. I was actually kind of sad yesterday. Like, you have one of those days where you just sit and just sulk. But then I remember this quote by like Drew Barrymore, and she said this life is very interesting. In the end, some of your greatest pains becomes your greatest strengths. And it's like, this is just some real ass shit. I'm just like, Jasper, you dumbass bitch. You can sit here all day and be sad about shit that you can't be fucking control. Or you can get up, get some fucking lunch, get it together, plan. And then I woke up feeling like a badass bitch. Suck it, universe, respectfully. But anyways,
This is some
so
top tier
Respectfully.
energy. I need to channel some of your energy.
thank you, thank
Right?
you. So first question: what was your impression of me? I feel like I'm going to ask every guest this. So, what was your impression of me?
Um, I mean, the energy is just like immaculate. Like like watching your episodes and stuff like that. I don't know what I expected, but like the first time you did your intro, I was just like, this is good stuff. Like I love the energy, I love the aura that you're giving off, and I just love your like the way you present your information and like your podcast and stuff like that. It's just so fun to watch, and I'm just like sitting here like being on the call with you. It's just like, this is so exciting.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's like the same thing for me. Your energy is like, I wish I could achieve that level of energy, at least this early in the morning. Um, but yeah, I hope that I can absorb some of the energy. Please share
Okay.
some of it.
So for those who haven't heard of you guys before, can you give like a short introduction, maybe throw in an interesting fact or two about yourself, please? Because I don't know much about you guys at all. There are a lot of words that I've found that I'm very curious about. Well, I know because Pixie is not here with us today, so something about Pixie doesn't like raisins, and how Alexa does like snow. Why you don't like snow? Why don't you like snow? What's wrong with snow? Why?
Listen,
And how Kayla likes space and NASA's. Okay, you gotta tell me about all that, girl. Like, you need to tell me, why do you like space and NASA's?
oh god. um, First of all, about snow. I live in a city where we have very harsh winters, so I think I've lived here for 8 years now, and every year that winter comes around, I just gain like more and more disdain for it. So I don't mind winter, but it's just like when it snows here and when the weather gets really bad, it just like it makes everything in life more difficult. And so I just have gained a certain disdain for snow. At least the snow that we get in Pittsburgh, which is where I live, because it's never a good time when it snows here, and especially now, like you don't get snow days when you're 27. Like you still have to truck and
Right.
go to work and like get your ass out in the snow and dig your car out and all that stuff. So I'm just like, I'd rather it not snow, especially when I have stuff to do.
How about you, Kayla? Why do you like space and NASA's?
Why do I love space? I don't know. Like, whenever I was in school in science, my favorite subject would always be when we talk about space. And I think there's something about like the unknown and learning about the universe that I find really interesting. Because I'm someone who asks a lot of questions and is really curious about just like life, not just on Earth but like other places. Like I also like am really into the alien type stuff also.
Ghosts.
Yeah,
Anything
that
like
kind of that kind
other
of stuff.
forms
And I
of life.
also yes, and I also really like astrology and things like that. And I think it's interesting to see how ancient civilizations were very into space and knew a lot about it before we had the technology too. So
We
overall, I
had all the
think I
secrets.
just find, yeah, I just find like the curiosities of space really interesting.
Cool. So for Alexa, I know you work in the medical field and you're currently in grad school. So what are you studying and what do you do?
So right now I am finishing up my master's in clinical community psychology. So it's a very specific program to the university that I go to. So I mainly my interest started in clinical psych. Like I wanted to be a counselor, like a therapist, like go the whole 9 yards and get my doctorate type thing. And then I found this program that was like a mix of clinical psychology, but also adding in a community aspect, like taking what you learn as a mental health professional and applying that to the community in need, like the homeless population and other communities like that. So I really kind of fell in love with the way the program mixed those two aspects of like psychology, but also giving back to the community and advocating work and stuff like that. So that's currently what I'm working on getting my master's in. What I do for work right now does not actually have anything to do with what I'm getting my degree in. So I do work in the medical field, but I'm more just doing administrative work right now. But the job helps me pay for school, so it's kind of one of those things where it's like I'm getting used to working in a medical setting, and also like it's helping me pay for being able to actually be like a mental health professional when I finish up school. So it's kind of one of those things where it's like a means to an end type
Yeah.
situation, but
Yeah,
it's a
I feel
good
like mental
job.
health is like it's probably a very important topic like for everybody these days, especially like with the whole coronavirus, and everybody is in lockdown and everybody's like they're stuck at home and and surely like everybody's mental health is being affected. I can
Yeah.
talk about mine for sure. Um, yeah, and I know you have a cat. So what's your cat's name?
She's actually laying right next to me on the bed. Her name is Melody, but I call her Mel for short, or one of the other 10,000 nicknames that I have for her. But this is exposing myself as a K-pop stan, named after B2B's fandom name because that's my favorite K-pop group, and their fandom name is Melody, and so that is how she got her name. But yeah, I've had her. It'll be 5 years this August since I adopted her, so it's my little
Besides B2B,
baby.
who like which other K-pop bands do you like?
Oh man, there's so many. I really like ATEEZ. I really like Day Six. I really like A Pink. I've been getting really into IVE, I think is how you say it. They're one of the newer girl groups, but like
Yeah.
I've really loving all of their
Mhm.
releases. Shiny, like some of the I love a lot of the like second and third gen like
Yeah, like
groups and
Girls'
stuff like
Generation,
that.
Super
Yeah,
Junior.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
That's
yeah,
that's my niche area of K-pop.
yeah. Are you a shower?
I am, but Kayla is a bigger one than me.
Well, we'll get into that. I actually have a lot of questions to ask Kayla. I actually found some stuff about Kayla. So,
Oh, guess who's
so
Kayla's already a YouTube personality, so their information is out
yeah,
there.
yeah, 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 yeah. Yeah.
Oh.
So I know like one of your favorite hobbies is binge watching TV. So what are you currently watching?
So I watch a lot of K dramas. So
Hmm.
first of all, I still have not moved on from Heartstopper. I've probably rewatched the show like 5 times at this point. So that's always currently on my binge rotation. But beyond that, I watch a lot of K-dramas. So, God, what am I currently watching? There's one, Our Blues is out that I'm currently watching. Love All Play, which is like a badminton romance type drama that I'm currently watching. Um, I just finished binge watching it's a sitcom, Ted Lasso, and I became obsessed with it, as well as Abbott Elementary, another great sitcom that I just recently finished binge watching. Um, but yeah, I do watch a lot of TV. So I'm always probably watching like on top of BL, which we all watch, like two or three
Mm-hmm.
K dramas, and then I love a good like American sitcom. Those are usually like my what I like to watch while I'm eating dinner show because they're
Yeah, yeah. What's
I
your
don't have
favorite
to pay
sitcom?
attention to subtitles. I really like Brooklyn Nine-Nine.
Yes.
I really love New Girl, and also I would say Superstore is also one of my favorites. So a lot of like the classics, like The Office and that kind of stuff, have never really been my vibe. I'm exposing myself on that one,
Same.
but I like a
Same.
lot of the like early like 2011 to 2015 era sitcoms, like stuff in that vein.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. Very cool. Well, currently I'm binge watching Stranger Things, and apparently season 4 was out yesterday. So,
Yeah,
yeah,
I've
very,
been
very
seeing it
excited.
everywhere.
Yeah. Very, yeah. I'm a huge fan. So we also know that there's some stuff that you don't like. So we've just talked about how you don't like snow, and you don't like closed-minded people. So what do you mean by that?
Um, okay, so I would consider myself like a very, what is the word I want to say? Like I've talked about this before, kind of like when you exist as like a queer person or a person of color or a combination of both, like you kind of by default, like your existence is like a political thing. So for me, like just existing in this world, like meeting people who, even if they say like, oh, I don't have an issue with queer people, or I'm not racist, or whatever they might throw out there. For me, people who go against certain things or have certain rationales for why they don't support certain initiatives, like even if they say they support me as a person, if you're, anti Black Lives Matter, then that is not supporting me as a person, if that makes sense, because I am a Black person. So if you're going to say, oh, I'm your friend, I'm your family, but I don't support this initiative that is working towards, gaining your freedom, or, equalizing you in a community that you've never been equal in, then like for me, that is closed mindedness. And if you're not willing to try and understand my perspective on why, or other people's perspectives on why those things are important, then, that's kind of something that is a deal breaker for me. I've never been one of those people who can put aside like political ideations
Mm-hmm.
and
Yeah,
identities and kind of,
I
have a
agree.
friendship in spite of that. Like that's just not an
Mhm.
option for me anymore. So that is kind of like my view of like, if you're not willing to hear my side of the story and try and understand why this is important to me, and this is something that I need the people in my life to understand and support and respect, then like that's being closed minded to me, and I just can't. I'm at the point in my life where like I can't emotionally handle people like that, so I just kind of have to like
Yeah,
yeet them
yeah.
out.
Yeah, cut that shit.
Yeah,
Yeah,
there's only so much I can
exactly.
put up with.
Yeah, I agree with
Yeah.
you. Yeah. So moving on to Kayla. So I know you haven't been on the channel from the very beginning. Can you tell us about the backstory? Like, where were you before you joined them?
So I started being very active in the BL fandom when I made some unpopular opinions videos, because at the time that was a trending type of video that people were making for whatever genre of YouTube you were doing. And they blew up overnight, and I was very shocked. So after that, I started just being like, well, if people are going to listen, then I'm going to talk about things in BL that bother me, things that I like, things about production value, because that's what I went to school for.
Mhm.
So I guess whenever Pixie, our co host, was thinking about doing a podcast, she thought of me and reached out. But at first, like, I was really busy. I was going through it. So I ended up declining in the beginning. And then I did come on as a guest for 2 of our episodes where we talked about Lovely Writer. And then soon after that, one of the other hosts got a little too busy to be able to actively do the podcast every week. So Pixie reached out to me again, and I was like, you know what? Like, why not? Things have slowed down a little, and I never really have anyone to talk about BL with in my everyday life except for things that I rant about to my sister. So
Yeah.
that's how I came about being a host on the podcast.
Very cool. That's really cool. And I know that you did radio in the past too. So can you tell me more about it?
Yeah, so in college, my friend and I decided that we wanted to do well, I feel like it was probably more of me pushing her into it, but we decided that we wanted to do a K-pop radio show. So we started that, not really expecting anything, and it was just so fun. Like, it was the one thing that we would look forward to every week, much like the podcast is now. And we would put so much like time and effort into it, sometimes even more than our classes, which I don't know if we should have been doing that. But yeah, we got a lot of opportunities out of it. Like, we did correspondence at KCON the one year, well, 2 years. We hosted like the random dance play panels at the local convention. So yeah, we ended up making a lot of connections. And unfortunately, our radio show started to blow up our last year. So
Oh no.
it was pretty sad having to leave it, and I do miss it and think about it all the time. But yeah, that's my background in
Nice.
radio, I
Nice.
guess.
Yeah, and so earlier we've kind of mentioned that you're also a K-pop fan. So tell me, like, are you a shallow or are you not a shallow?
Well, I don't know if you can see by my wall and my light stick right there, but
I
100%
think they might be a shower.
a shower.
Yeah,
100%.
yeah, they're a
For
fucking legend.
a long
Yeah,
time. Yeah.
yeah. So I remembered my sister and I went to South Korea for a trip once, and this was a couple of years ago, and we saw a lot of these like promotional cutboard cutouts, and then like we would like go to like every shopping districts and like just take a photo with them. And and back then they were like really huge. Like I don't know if you guys have heard of this brand, but Etude House.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, because they were like an ambassador for them at one point, and they had like a lot of these like cutboard cutouts of them everywhere in South Korea. Yeah, so we would just like take pictures of them, and yeah, and I also cried a lot when Jungkook passed. So yeah,
That was an emotional time for me as well.
yeah, it was very emotional as well. Yeah, for me as well. So we know like Kayla likes boba tea. So what's your favorite flavor?
So I usually interchange between Thai tea boba and mango boba. Sometimes I'll get variations like taro, or like the shop that I go to has some specialties, but I usually get Thai tea or mango.
Cool, nice. Yeah.
Classics.
Yeah, I like my mango flavor as well. It's also one of my favorites, and I like the strawberry one as well.
Yeah, I always
Yeah,
go
it's good.
for strawberry, or like I've been really into passion fruit boba lately.
Oh yeah.
So I definitely always go for the fruity ones, partially because I am technically lactose intolerant. So like the milk teas are like not my friend, even though I do still drink them sometimes. But yeah, I always
I'm like, it's
default
okay,
towards
I
the
can
fruity
suffer.
ones. Yeah, sometimes you
Yeah,
just
because it
wanna
tastes
suffer.
good. Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah, it tastes good. Do it for the taste. So question. So what does Lovecast mean? I mean, it rhymes really well with podcast, like Lovecast the Podcast, Lovecast the Podcast. It almost sounds like it can be a BL title, like maybe like a Harry Potter or BL. So yeah, but what does
Yeah.
Lovecast mean?
That was, I think, when me and Pixie were kind of brainstorming titles, and Coco, who was one of our original hosts, who is no longer doing it with us. That one was Pixie's idea. I think there was definitely some inspiration from things like Harry Potter, because Pixie's a big Harry Potter fan, so I think there might have been like some inspiration in that there. But honestly, I think it just kind of came from the love in boys love. It's really like love plus podcast. It just kind of became like Lovecast, the BL podcast, and we just kind of like rolled with it. I think when we
Nice.
first started the podcast, like none of us really had any indication of how long would be doing it for. Like we've been going for almost a year and a half now, and also like what would become of it. It was very much like an on a whim thing. Like when Pixie messaged me about it, I was just like, why the hell not type thing. So I think that was kind of like our intention going into it. And not to say that we didn't put thought into like the title and our branding and stuff like that originally, but I don't know that we ever like expected it to become like the brand that it is today as like a BL podcast. So I feel like we kind of just like went with something simple, like the love and boys love plus podcast equals Lovecast, and we kind of just like
Nice.
ran with it.
Yeah, that's very nice. So, what was your inspiration of starting a podcast?
So this would probably be like Pixie is like the ringleader of the whole thing, and he's not here, so I'll just like tell her story for it. So for her, me and Pixie were in a BL Discord server where we were kind of like acquaintances. We talked a lot, had discussions within the server, and Pixie always says that she liked the way that I approached explaining things to people, in a way like if someone does not understand why something might be problematic or not the best thing to say. Pixie always says she appreciated that I would take the time to explain that to people, especially for her, someone whose English is not her first language and she's not as tuned, like her culture is very different from the American culture and the things that we might consider problematic and stuff like that. So she always said she appreciated that I would take the time to like explain stuff out to people and not be nasty about it, which, I think is kind of like the bare minimum, but I guess, people haven't always had that experience in fandom spaces. So she said taking that and being able to have discussions, like long format, like text discussions, for her, she was kind of like, it would be easier for me to do this stuff over video because, English isn't my first language, or over talking. So, sometimes typing stuff out, you miss context and things don't always come across the way you intend them to. So she was kind of just like, I want to have these conversations about boys love and BL and the fandom. But for me, like talking in an audio format is a lot easier than talking in a text format or, trying to type long paragraphs out to have conversations with people. So that was basically her inspiration for, basically wanting to have these like long format conversations about BL, but doing it in a way that was easier to actually have a conversation that might not always come across over a text format type thing.
Yeah, I agree. Because like for me, I think I feel the same way as well. Instead of like texting and Discord or messaging people and essays, right? At least like having YouTube or having like different these type of like podcast platforms where I can kind of express my opinions of certain things and certain topics on BL. Because I do think like besides like the steamy bed scenes in BLs and the romance of the boys. I think there's a lot more that's beyond BL, like the whole, the LGBTQ community, and I think it's these are very important things that we need to talk about. So yeah, for me personally in my channel, I really do hope to create a space where I get to invite different people from different walks of life where they can share their opinions. And so it's kind of like a free space for people to talk about things. So I really appreciate like what you guys do. So truly. So I know you guys have done like a ton of BL content, from talking about BL shows, shipping cultures, and interviewing guests, as I've mentioned earlier. Now I'm curious, like out of all the guests, who do you guys enjoyed interviewing the most and why?
Oh, that's always such a hard question to answer because I feel like it changes all the time. Kayla, do you want to go first on this one?
Okay, so there are a few that I really, I would put in like maybe like a top 5 list. For number 1, I'm gonna say Pavel. I'm even wearing his new merch right now. I love Pavel because I was a big Two Moons 2 fan. I also loved our interview with Bruce from Lovely Writer. I thought it was so nice getting to talk to someone who is openly LGBT about a BL role that they're playing. I loved our interview with Pan. Pan is slowly becoming a best boy to the podcast.
Yeah.
Yeah, there have been so many people that I just like get so excited before interviews sometimes because I'm like, I can't believe it feels surreal getting to like talk about some of these people to some of these people sometimes because I watched the shows that they're in and really love them. So yeah, I think I have about like 3 or 5 favorites.
Three
at
or
the top.
five.
Cool.
3 or 5.
For me, of course, we always have to shout out Perth. He was our first
Yes.
ever like actor guest on the podcast, and like the 2 episodes that we've done from him with him have always just been like the most fun and chaotic and all over the place conversations, and he's just always like such a fun person to talk to and have conversations with. I also have to put Pan on there. Like Kayla said, he's just such a sweetheart, and talking with him made me really excited for Oh My Sunshine Night, and just getting to know him has been really, really cool. From a bisexual perspective, when we talked to Adriana from Game Boys, I think that was just like the first time I have ever, maybe not the first time, but I had a lot of gay panic going on during that interview, and like when you watch it back, you can see my face of me just being like utterly like in love, and like seeing her face was just like, I mean, obviously she was a joy to talk to, but I think I always love when we have like women on the podcast, whether they're involved in BL or the writers or authors and stuff like that, just to kind of get the female perspective, because obviously a lot of the actors we have on are dudes, so like it's nice to kind of create a space where like we as women or assigned female at birth or identifying as women can just kind of like sit and chat and kind of have that there's a different energy that comes with having that kind of space and having conversations in those kind of space. So I always love like we have authors on and or other female guests and stuff like that. But
Cool.
yeah.
Very cool. So next question. Well, you don't have to name names, but have you guys ever had a bad encounter with a guest? Did you have anyone that didn't exactly mesh well with the crew?
I don't think we've had, in the interviews that we had, like when we've been actively talking to people, I don't know, well, I can't say that. There are some people that we've had on in the past, not actors, I will say that much. Like the actors have always been an absolute joy to work with, and super professional and super kind throughout the whole process. But some of the like more behind the scenes in the industry people we've talked to, it's not necessarily that we haven't had a bad experience, but I just think the way we do our podcast didn't quite mesh with like their intentions of being on the podcast, if that makes sense. So, you know, and
What was their intention?
I don't want to say like it kind of came off as just like talking about themselves as opposed to like having a conversation. Like the topic of that episode, I can't say it because it'll definitely give away who it was more meant to be like an overarching conversation, and it kind of became something that was like about this person and their achievements and what they've
Oh, so they're
done.
just there to promote themselves, sort of.
It kind of felt like that after the fact, and you know, we had issues getting like actually having a conversation. It kind of ended up just being like more us listening and like not really conversating within the space. So like you know, that's like, and it's fine, you know, it's all well and good, like people watch the episode, but then like after we recorded, we kind of just had this moment of like, sitting there on the call with each other, like after the person had left, like, oh, that's not quite what we expected it would be type situation. But actors wise, all the actors have always been wonderful. I genuinely, like, I'm not just saying that, but like, I genuinely have not had any experience that I would consider not enjoyable with any of the actors that we've talked to on the podcast.
Very cool. So, how do you get all these actors onto your podcast?
Luck.
Literally.
This is literally why we have to thank Perth, because when we reach out to Perth, like, you know, they have like their manager's info or an email or something like that is usually in their Instagram bio. And that's always like what we use to contact people. Like, we usually just shoot a message in the dark to their manager and see what comes of it. But when we messaged Perth, we legitimately had maybe 50 subscribers on YouTube and had put out 3 episodes. So like, very much like, could totally understand if people did not like want to come on this random ass like podcast with only 50 people watching it, and like nothing that would like, I mean, very much might not seem like a legitimate thing, but because we got Perth on when we did, and because he kind of like took a chance on us, I think it gave us a lot more legitimacy as a podcast, and kind of, you know, that was something we could use to show to other managers when we reached out, and actors that, hey, we've had this person on and this is a real BL actor and they came on the podcast. And so for a while we did actually like use that when we were reaching out, like, this is our interview with Perth Nakun. We've done this before, you know, we've talked to an actor before. But yeah, honestly, it's just like those numbers that they have in their Instagram bio, we hit them up online, and a lot of the times we don't get a response. A lot of the times they decline because people aren't comfortable doing an international interview, which, you know, is, we can provide a translator now, so that helps in that aspect a little bit. And, you know, sometimes they just want to focus on promoting within the Thai community, which is understandable, but it's all just like, honestly, luck and the management team and what they're looking to do to promote their series or their pairing or the actor. And it's just, it usually all just starts with a message or an email. Like, it's really just like throwing a shot in the dark, and things have happened to work out a decent amount of the time for us.
Nice. So, when did you guys first realize that you were getting popular?
I don't know if I still even think that we're
Are we
popular.
I don't think
a
I
word.
think that.
Well, I mean, you guys like are like a growing channel. Like, your podcast is growing.
That's true.
Yeah, I think for me, maybe when we hit our first, when we hit 1,000 subscribers on YouTube, which like is not a big number, but we kind of had this thing of like, this is our first year, like, we know, you know, growth might not be a big thing, like, you know, it's just, we're just doing this for us, we're not necessarily doing it to hit like certain number milestones or get a certain number of views. But like, I think when we hit 1,000 subscribers on YouTube, which like, for me, as someone who has not been a content creator prior to this, or been really like doing anything on social media outside of like my personal social medias, like 1,000 subscribers, and knowing that like there are now over 1,000 people who are like subscribed to our channel and at least semi interested in the content we put out and the interviews that we do, I think that's when I realized that like we had really established like a solid community. And, you know, when we created the podcast, there weren't a lot of podcasts that discussed live action BL at the time, which you kind of mentioned at the start. So I think it was kind of cool to like hit that milestone and be like, oh, like 1,000 people have been looking for this kind of content that we've been providing, and hopefully providing in a way they enjoy for the past however many months it had been when we hit that milestone. So I think that was like, not necessarily realizing that we're popular, but like a moment of like, oh, we have like a real community here type situation.
Yeah. So I know you guys have been in the game for quite some time now, for a year and a half, was it? Yeah. So when you first started out, were you embarrassed to tell people what you did?
For me, not really, because most of the people in my life already know that like I'm listening to K-pop and watching K-dramas and watching BL, like my close friends and even like my mom and my family kind of know that that's my fandom niche. So less so about the content of what we talked about, but more I think that people just did not expect me to be doing a podcast because I've never been like, I guess, someone that like puts myself out there in that manner. So, and you know, like obviously people love podcasts, but there's like this kind of like not stigma, but like meme that goes around about like just like anyone starting a podcast because they
Yeah.
don't have anything better to
Yeah.
do. So I was like,
Yeah.
yeah, I'm doing a VL podcast now, and like, you know, I mean, people weren't surprised about the content, but you know, it's just like me doing a podcast. I think was surprising to people when I started telling them that that was what was going on.
What about you, Kayla?
I'm like an open book with all of my interests, but I do have the advantage of my mom being a BL fan. So, yeah, that pretty much opens up any and all conversation about BL. So I never felt like embarrassed about the fact that I do this podcast or the subjects that we talk about. And a lot of them overlap with stuff that I already was pretty passionate about. And my friends are like very like minded. Like my best friend, she watches dramas too and is like into Asian media. My sister, I reeled into the
Yeah.
BL dramas.
That's
So
what
it's
younger siblings are for.
it really is. So it's like, yeah, I'm pretty open with it. And I remember we talked before about like, if someone asks what this podcast is about, like, how do you explain it to them? And I always think about that and I'm like, well, it's really difficult to explain like
Yeah.
what BL is and how
Yeah.
it exists. So my thought process is always just like, oh, we talk about like LGBT shows and issues.
Yeah.
Asian
And
dramas.
that's it.
Yeah.
Yes, Asian
Keep
dramas.
it more general.
But yeah, generally everyone in my life, like, they know I do this and they're like, cool.
Yeah.
Cool. Very cool. So, what is the best piece of advice could you give a newbie for someone who, you know, just start out like trying to create like a BL podcast?
I would say just like don't be afraid to discuss the things that you are interested in discussing. I think that's always been one of the things that we kind of have as one of our like mantras or whatever, is like not shying away from content that might be considered controversial or something that's not, you know, always super fluffy and lighthearted. You know, if you want to talk about the dark side of the BL industry or how it impacts the LGBT community or things that might not always be the easiest to listen to for people, I would say don't be
Yeah.
afraid to do it, because
Yeah.
there are people who want to have those conversations and are looking for spaces where they can have those conversations. And that's, you know, what we've always realized when we release our more controversial episodes is that, you know, people are looking to have those conversations. So if there's content that you want to put out that you think people might not be as into, I would say just go for it, because there's always more people that are interested in discussing those things and maybe have the same mindset that you do, that they think it might not be a popular topic of conversation or whatever, that will be really grateful to see someone with a platform and with a voice, you know, creating that space for discussion.
Yeah. What about you, Kayla? What advice would you give to a newbie?
Alexa went with a very like inspirational route, but for some reason I was thinking more on a technical
Yeah.
level.
Yeah.
Which
Yeah.
fits.
Because yeah, it's
Like with the
interesting.
equipments and stuff, right?
Yeah. So, like we mentioned, podcasting has become like so popular to do that I feel like if you're not bringing something that's already at a set standard to the table, then it might be difficult to get a following or have anyone listening. So I feel like if you have the means to, basic things like learning how to use mics and webcams and lighting and stuff like that would really make a difference in,
Yeah.
I guess, the quality that you're putting out. And I guess would have people
For
more
sure.
people want to watch and listen.
Yeah, for sure, definitely. So, what is your favorite thing about doing this?
Honestly, I just think being able to create connections like this, not even necessarily talking to actors or celebrities, as exciting as that is, but kind of being able to create connections with other BL content creators and people in the BL fandom that I have been like watching or following for years before I started the podcast and was super like vocal in the BL fandom. Like I had watched Kayla's videos before we had talked to them on the podcast, and then, here we are down the line and they're one of the co-hosts with us, and people like Revel and people that are considered like staples in the BL community, just being able to like have conversations and connections and friendships with people who I have considered like what's the word I'm looking for? Like, I guess, just like when it comes to the BL fandom, like household names type thing. It's been really cool to be able to create those connections, and also like obviously creating connections with the people who watch and listen to the podcast and our patrons and the people in our Discord server. And it's kind of just all made me so much more involved and active in the BL fandom than I was before I did this, when I was kind of just like a backstander, kind of watching the community go by. So like actively being a member of the community has been really, really fun to kind of like get into it more.
Yeah, what about you, Kayla?
I think whenever I was doing my own videos, even though I had that presence, in the fandom, I think I was still very like isolated from people. Like there were people that I would consider colleagues maybe or peers, but I didn't really have any friends. But since getting into the podcast, I feel like I've been able to make like genuine connections with other people who enjoy the same stuff. There's so many people that come to my mind when I say that. And yeah, I think just being able to connect with others and talk about something we all like is probably the biggest plus, other than slowly
Yeah.
creating this community.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. What is your least favorite thing about doing this?
I don't know. Least favorite. That's something I guess for me, as much as like I don't want to be concerned with like growth in numbers and stuff like that, like you can't help but be concerned with it, especially when you're on a platform like YouTube that is showing you how well each episode does, and if it does better than the last one, and if your growth this month is going up compared to the last month or down. So it's like you can't help but like, we didn't
Compare
start
yourself
this
to other people.
Exactly.
Yeah,
And,
yeah.
we didn't
Yeah.
start this to be about the numbers or hit a certain number of subscribers or viewers or listeners, but like the nature of content creation, I feel like makes it impossible to ignore those things. So like feeling like I
Yeah.
have to be concerned with like hitting certain milestones, and is this video achieving as well as our last 10 did or whatever, and stuff
Yeah.
like that. It's just like it takes up a lot more brain space than I would like it to.
What about you, Kayla? What's your least favorite thing about doing this?
I think for least favorite, at least the most discouraging thing for me is whenever we like try so hard for a long time to get a specific person on, and we just can't. Like it's just impossible. Because I don't know, it's that same thing about like comparing this podcast to other ones that I'm like, it just makes me discouraged. Like I don't know what else to say about it. And it feels like overwhelming sometimes because I get very like in my own head. So I'll be like, okay, like what is the point then if we couldn't get like this person on or that person on, when really it's just like you can just try someone else or keep trying, because we have kept trying and eventually
Yeah.
got the person on. So
Yeah.
it's just a matter of trying not to be too discouraged that I'm like down on myself.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Yeah. So let's talk about something a little bit more lighthearted. Okay. So have you guys ever had a crush especially on someone you've known for a very long time, like a childhood best friend?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I think for many, it's a dream to date your best friend, right? Like nothing is daunting anymore because you know each other so well. There's no struggling making relationships work. So, what if I tell you, what about like a person with a position of trust, like a doctor or a professor or a teacher?
That's a little bit more murky. That gets into like power dynamics and stuff like that, which is like, I don't know if I would want to be, especially like thinking about like dating one of my professors. I'm like, ooh, that's like, I mean, you admire them from afar. Like that person is like,
Yeah,
that's a very attractive professor. Or like,
yeah.
wow, my doctor's so good looking. But like, in terms
You
of like
wouldn't actually want to
legitimately,
fuck them.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, that's the way to put
yeah.
it.
Yeah. Okay. So we'll get to the crux of today's episode. So today we'll be talking about Together with Me. So it's pretty much about two characters, Corin and Knock. They're childhood best friends who grew up in the same small town, inseparable. They played together every day and were integral to each other's lives until one day Corin's family suddenly left. So years later, two are reunited at university, and their friendship is rekindled instantly. To celebrate the reunion, the two go out drinking in their old hometown. The next morning, the two wake up only to realize that they had slept together while heavily drunk the night before. So Corin and Knox struggle with their relationship as it became clear that they might be something more than that, but many obstacles stand in their way, including Knox's conniving girlfriend. So, how do you guys feel about this series after watching it? Was there anything you like or didn't like?
I have so many thoughts about this series because
Go for it.
if you have watched or listened to the podcast, if you have seen me on social media, you know how I feel about MaxTul. They're my favorite ship in the BL world. They're my two of my favorite actors. I really appreciate their friendship and everything that they've given over the years to the community as advocates, and just like they are my people like in the BL world. So obviously this series was their first, well, there's Bad Romance, which is like they were the side couple there, but this was their first series as a main BL pairing. And I remember watching it in 2016 or 2017 whenever I ended up watching it, and like being enthralled by them and their chemistry, and obviously that got me hooked on them as people and following the pairing and stuff like that. But I went back and rewatched the show maybe late 2020 with my younger sibling, and like rewatching the show 4 years later, the actual content of the show itself was like, I was like, why was I so obsessed with this when I first watched it? And obviously it was because Max and Tul's chemistry is like impeccable and the selling point of the show, but like the actual plot of the show and the characters, like going back and watching it from a more critical lens, especially after all the growth we'd had in BL over those 4 years or whatever it was, I was just like, oh, this is certainly a show that I watched at a time, and I was just like, it didn't hit the way it did when I first watched it, and I was like, oh, interesting.
Yeah. How about you, Kayla?
I feel like Together with Me is one of those BLs that's a staple. And if you really want to know how BL started out, at least Thai BL, then it's a good one to watch. I'm going to be honest, I vaguely remember the plot because I think I struggled through it. I don't know. I don't think I found anything really memorable about it except for Max and Tool and Yua's character, because I think she was one of the first female characters in a BL that was well written and in depth.
Yeah.
So MaxTul definitely and her are the things that stick out to me about Together.
Yeah, I feel like we all need a Iwa in our lives, right? She's so
Truly.
funny and playful. She's like literally everybody's best friend, giving them like emotional support.
The queen, the ultimate queen. Like,
yes.
she cannot be topped.
Yeah. And I just think that, yeah, I agree with Alexa. Like Corin and Nock, they have this really good chemistry, and I personally believe it's unrivaled by any on-screen couple, gay or straight, that I've seen to date. Their acting clearly shows like the complicated mix of emotions that they have for each
Very
other,
true. Yeah.
right? And Corin is the ultimate simp, and Nock, he can be quite stupid sometimes, yes, but I do think that,
Yeah.
but I don't think he's annoying. I do think he has like a lot of trouble showing the love he carries.
Yeah.
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 Yeah, I think definitely like in terms of the characterization, like I think they did a really great job with both Korn and Nock, not having to come to terms with having feelings for his best friend after this drunken hookup, while also obviously still being involved with someone
Yeah.
romantically and believing he was heterosexual in that manner, and being scared to give up his relationship that he knows, to venture into the unknown of being with a man, and that man being his childhood best friend. And
Hmm.
they also did a great job with Korn being the one who is obviously already open and sure in his sexuality, like kind of reconciling having feelings with someone who is not sure in the same way he is. And I think that is something that comes across a lot in BL and LGBT media in general, is like, the person who is out and sure themselves, having to navigate being with someone who might not be ready to come out or might not be quite sure of their romantic feelings. And I remember absolutely loving Max's acting as Korn, and especially handling some of the like familial issues that came up, like with his sister and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
I absolutely loved his acting as Korn, and that was definitely one of the things that did stand out for me in the show.
Yeah, same for me. But I would say it wasn't perfect, and although I wasn't really sure about the whole unconventional love affair that happened, between the professor and his student, and Dr. Bright and his patient. I think the series was trying to challenge viewers of the different form of love that may not be socially acceptable in the society, or maybe they're trying to add some shock value to the series. But personally, I just have to disagree with it, because I think in many levels it's just unethical, because you've mentioned about like how
Yeah.
there's this whole power dynamic between like dating a doctor dating their own patient. But by all means, if they don't have this professional relationship, if they're not seeing each other,
Right.
then yeah, sure, for sure, yeah, go for it. Like, but the thing is, like, if a doctor and a patient, if the patient still is consulting that doctor, or the doctor is still caring for the patient, or the teacher, or the pupil or student is still, like, is still in the class with the teacher. So I do think that there is this whole power dynamic, and especially if for a doctor, they know so much about the patient. So in a way, it does come across as a little bit manipulative, and maybe borderline sexual harassment if they were to sleep together, sort of a thing. So yeah, I wasn't very so sure about those type of scenes. Like, what do you guys think?
Dr. Bright is probably one of my most hated characters in BL, and partially the fact that he was a doctor and a patient, and that power dynamic, and the way he clearly took advantage of Farm.
Yeah.
And what we learned about him is that he has a track record for taking advantage of young college students, and I think that really kind of is what made his character give me the ick. Is that like Farm is not the only university freshman or very young college student that he has been seeing and taking advantage of, and obviously Farm was very confused about everything that was going on with his feelings and their relationship, and I think Dr. Bright very much took advantage of that. And there are further scenes later in the series. I don't know how you feel about like getting too spoilery about things on here, but when he kind of tried to pressure Farm into having a threesome.
Yes, I was about to. Yeah.
Things like that, which is like, that goes beyond just like their
Yeah.
relationship dynamic into Dr. Bright just being like a gross dude and like trying
Yeah.
to pressure people into sexual
sex,
situations
yeah.
that they're not comfortable with,
Yeah.
So, I just like, I remember spending that whole series just like hoping Farm would like I
Yeah,
wanted to
he
save
he was
him.
so uncomfortable with it. I think
Yeah.
it was something about his birthday, right, where Dr. Bright like blindfolded him to his house, and he was like, "A surprise! This is your present. We're gonna have a
And
threesome."
Farm was like, I did not ask for this. Like,
Yeah,
this is your present that you want for yourself. But yeah, it was just like, oh,
yeah,
Dr. Bright as a character was just like very, ugh,
yeah.
icky, icky, icky. Um, so yeah, I did not. I still to this day, he's probably one of my like least favorite characters in the BL, and he was not a good person.
Yeah, for sure. What about you, Kayla? What do you think?
So, whenever the thing that bothers me about some of the relationships that happen, like for example with Dr. Bright, is that a lot of the time it's like painted in this casual type light, or it's made to be super romantic, which I just find so crazy because if I heard of that happening, I'd be like, you're a victim.
You're a victim.
Victim,
Yeah.
victim. Like, and I don't know, something about BL Productions at times promoting these couples who are like professor and student, something like that. Something about it just doesn't sit well with me. Like how we said, the power dynamic, and also just like, I don't know, the part that bothers me the most is how it's framed as something that's romantic, even though a lot of the times it is straight up sexual harassment and abuse. Because I don't want people to ever watch that and be like, oh,
It's
so
okay
that's
to do
fine.
that.
That's fine
Yeah.
to do.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, that's what I think about that. Not a fan of Dr. Bright. Not a fan. Mm-mm.
no,
Yeah.
neither am I. So let's talk about the evil ex-girlfriend and Corn's homophobic dad. So what do you guys think about these tropes?
The evil ex-girlfriend trope is probably my least favorite trope in BL. Because here's the thing, to an extent, I can understand Plum playing being upset with this how the situation went down. Obviously, she was cheated on, and Nock went about the whole situation through the whole 12 episodes in a very shady manner. And so, like, if she had just been the girlfriend that got cheated on, obviously, in that sense, you know, I relate to her and I would be on her side. But the way that they often turn the ex-girlfriends into these manipulative, like, conniving, like doing things that put people in danger and like trying to get people killed, which is like a very casual thing they insert, like the ex-girlfriend like trying to murder their exes, like the new partner and stuff like that. Like, how many times did Plum playing have Corn and Nock like beat up to the point that they were like in the hospital and physically injured, like in a very serious degree? So I think that's one of the things that always bothers me about the evil ex-girlfriend, is because there's merit to being an ex-girlfriend and being upset that you got cheated on, or that a relationship that you were very devoted to seemingly dissolved out of nowhere. But then they always take it to the next level and like make them like so wildly beyond any rational level of thinking in their actions, and making them do these things like putting people in danger and sneaking around and outing people. And it just, like, you know, it takes away all sympathy you might have had for her in the beginning. And so it's really frustrating for me, because those are often, it's either like the evil ex-girlfriend or the crazy Fujoshi character are often the only types of female representation we get in BL. So with the exception of characters like Yihua and a few other who are like well-written female characters. So I think it's just like really frustrating to watch those tropes and knowing that BL is a drama that is typically marketed towards women, or historically marketed towards women, and to know that a lot of the times they are villainized so heavily in the live action media can be really frustrating to watch.
What about Corn's homophobic dad?
That is also a classic trope in BL, is the homophobic parents. I can't remember as much of the details about that storyline. And like, you know, I vaguely remember like some of the early parts of season 2 where Korn's dad had this like weird dream of like Korn cross-dressing and like all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Just like weird things that like were totally out of pocket for him to be like thinking about. But yeah, I think, you know, obviously that is something that a lot of queer people experience. And so I think there is, you know, merit in addressing those storylines in some degree. I'm like struggling to remember the details of how it was addressed in Together With Me, particularly because I blocked a lot of the second season where his family was, I think, more heavily involved beyond his sister. But yeah, he was there.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, for sure. I agree with you. Yeah. What about you, Kayla? What do you think?
I don't remember the dad really at all, but for the ex-girlfriend thing, I think the fact that she went so far as to continuously orchestrate harm against them is pretty extreme, pretty bad. I don't know. I feel like in a real life situation, authorities might be contacted, some restraining orders might be put in place, but if she wasn't as extreme, then they could have had this opportunity to make her more sympathetic. Because the thing with a lot of the ex-girlfriends in that trope is that we don't really learn a lot about them. We don't know anything about them. They're just kind of there to move the plot along and be the center of conflict.
Yeah.
So if there was more depth to her character and she wasn't doing as insane things, then I think I would be able to sympathize with her more. But because they just never get into who she is as a person, her life, or why she acts the way she does, it's like I can't sympathize with that. And yeah, she's just terrible.
Yeah, she is terrible. Yeah, she's the bane of my existence. Was there anything in the series that you wish that they did differently?
That's a good question. I think in rewatching it, how do I want to say this? I think in terms of Korn and Knock, it would have been nice to see Korn have a little bit more agency, I think, in the situation. Kind of just talking about like being the person who is already out and open and kind of navigating, like pursuing interest in someone who is not at that level. I think Korn really like kind of relegated himself to being the side man. And I don't know if there was, you know, if they could explore more like internal reasons as for why he kind of didn't have as much agency. There were like a few key moments specifically towards the end where he kind of finally told Knock, like, I'm not going to do this anymore type situation. And that was like what finally got Knock, like, knocked some sense into him, for lack of a better term. And like kind of, so maybe, you know, they didn't do that because that would have kind of solved this plot too quickly and they needed to, you know, spend time, you know, building up the relationship and stuff like that. But there are a lot of moments where Korn just sort of sat back and watched like Knock being very lovey-dovey with Plum playing and kind of disregarding the emotions that were clearly there between them. And I think that kind of got very hard for me to watch, especially going back in my second watch, and kind of, you know, having realized my own place as a queer person in the time since I originally watched the series and stuff like that. Going back and kind of watching him being almost like a doormat was kind of really hard for me to watch, and I felt like Knock really took advantage of his feelings a lot, and it made it really frustrating for me when I went back and rewatched it.
What about you, Kayla?
Yeah. I agree with Alexa, and also I think I would just get rid of Dr. Bright's storyline and maybe replace it with, I don't know, maybe give Yua more screen time, or I feel like they could even bring in like a different couple with like classmates of theirs or something like that. Maybe even give Yua like a more romantic arc, but
Mm.
If we just get rid of Dr. Bright, I think that could improve it a
solve
lot.
so many
I think that's
issues.
an easy
Yeah.
fix.
That makes me think of one of my least favorite things about the second season is that they basically turned Farm into Dr. Bright 2.0. And the
Yeah.
way he was like,
Yeah,
I was like,
yeah.
you went through all this trauma with this horrible dude who took advantage of you, and then he basically, and I guess that is one way of like handling his trauma and PTSD that he went through is to like, become the thing that had
Yeah,
hurt
because he
him
was
almost.
essentially was hooking up with other guys while he was in a
Yeah.
relationship with Rit, right?
Poor
Yeah,
Brit.
poor
My
Rit.
heart was
Yeah.
like, I was like, how could it made me so frustrated that they basically made Farm the
Yeah.
thing that had hurt him so badly in the first season, and I was like, why did they do that to
Yeah.
him? I was
Well,
reading
in the end,
so
Dr.
much.
Bright and Farm, they ended up together, so.
We don't, I don't even want to talk about that.
Nope.
That
Get rid of it.
like Kayla said, if Dr. Bright had just been eliminated from the get-go, I think that could have solved so many problems.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, for sure. So, as an avid BL fan and a content creator, what kind of characters, tropes, and storyline would you like to see in the future?
I think for me, I'd be really interested in seeing more characters that break the mold of um, a lot of the stereotypical BL characters that we see. So, thinking about series like Secret Crush on You that have really kind of taken some um, of the less like acceptable type of queer people for BL, like people that are more femme and flamboyant and things like that. Seeing more of those characters have more presence in BL and more unconventional pairings. We always often get the typical big tough top, super strong guy, super like forward with his feelings, and the little itty bitty bottom who cries a lot and needs to be protected at all times. So I think seeing a lot of those tropes be reversed or kind of turned on their head, or putting two people that maybe would not be the conventional BL pairing aesthetically together, just like those kind of things are just like really novel to me when I see them in BL, and I think they from the get-go make shows kind of stand out a little bit more. So I'd like to see like more shows explore that kind of stuff in the future.
Hey, what about you, Kayla?
I think there are a lot of untapped storylines or things you could create a storyline around that BL hasn't done yet. I was recently thinking they should do a BL that centers around Formula One racing. That has
Okay.
that has like a racer and an engineer, like the automobile engineer. I think that would be
Nice.
interesting. I've always had this BL in my head that I wanted to write that had to do with like competition roller skating. I think that would be interesting.
Nice.
Because we have we have had so many engineer storylines.
Yeah,
So many
university
storylines
students,
about,
right? Yeah.
Yeah, about like
The
doctors and basically
Engineers.
the occupations that are like the big ones that people are like, oh, I'm gonna be this and make a lot of money. But I feel
Yeah,
like
yeah,
it
yeah.
would be nice to see more obscure things, and maybe even just someone who like is a clerk at at like a gas station or something.
Yeah.
Seeing more real life people who are true to what most people are like and live how most people do, not so extravagantly. Maybe more like characters who are facing like social and economic inequality. I think would be interesting to see. I just feel like there is really an untapped market where some BLs could focus on more serious stuff. Like it doesn't have to be a super angsty BL, but there are just some things that I feel like I'm like, I should write that. Like nobody is doing it, so I should do it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know if that makes sense. Just I feel
Yeah.
like there's an untapped market basically for certain storyline subjects that you could create a story around.
Yeah, very cool. Very, very cool. So, just to wrap up, what are your future plans that the viewers should anticipate?
Um, for the podcast, I mean, we've always got a lot of fun episodes planned. Like June, we've got some Pride themed episodes coming up. We definitely want to start doing more like Instagram lives and TikTok lives and live streams, which we've kind of gotten away from a bit this year because we've been so busy. But you know, we've been recently venturing into. We've only done one episode so far as of this recording this, but we kind of started a new series, which is like our BL 101 series, where we're kind of taking kind of like an educational look at like a lot of the key points of BL. So like we did, the first one was what is BL and where to find it. We have a BL 101 ships planned. We have one like we want to do directors, like all that kind of stuff. Just kind of taking a more educational perspective, because I think a lot of the times you jump into a fandom and you know there's so many terms getting thrown at you and so many traditions and certain ways the fandom operates that like when you're new to it, you know, you don't understand how a lot of stuff within the fandom works. So just kind of
Mm-hmm.
like creating like an educational but also fun space where we can like explain like certain like terms around shipping or certain traditions in BL and why things operate the way they do in certain parts of the fandom. So it's kind of like our new series that we're taking on that we're really excited to kind of jump into some more. So definitely we have that to look forward to, and hopefully a lot more exciting interviews and appearances and stuff like that as well.
Cool. Very cool. I'm looking forward to
Yeah.
them. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I had fun today. Do you guys had fun?
Yes, I'm so glad we
So
got
much
to like
fun.
work this out and finally sit down and talk. It was not an
Yeah.
easy path to get here.
Yeah. So if you enjoy the video, please don't forget to give me a like, subscribe to the channel, and follow my Instagram and Twitter, which will be linked in the description box down below. And please don't forget to follow Lovecast the Podcast, which I'll also link their channel in the description box down below. I'll see you guys. Bye.
Hi. Thank
Bye.
you. Okay. Yay. We did it. Let me end the recording.